This is a Divorce Curious podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Mitchell. If you're here, your life and marriage might kind of suck right now, and I've been exactly where you are. At Divorce Curious, we're going to say the quiet parts out loud. We're going to sit in the anger, confusion, and disappointment that you're feeling and talk about what it looks like to go through the before, during, and after of being divorce curious. I'm glad you're here. Welcome to the Divorce Curious podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Mitchell, and today I am bringing you a brilliant woman. Just imagine this. Imagine knowing someone who owns a business that provides a service that can take the fear and the uncertainty and some of the anger even out of the divorce process and focus on the tagline of the business. I love it, is divorce without destruction. So that's who I'm introducing you to today. I am here with Tess Worrell. She is a mediator, and she won't flex on herself, but I will. She's an attorney and just a brilliant business owner who has created a service with her team that helps people just like you who are kind of in this divorce curious space find the next best steps that you can take or consider that helps you get where you want to go without burning everything down in the process. So Tess, thank you so much for joining me today on the show. I am so excited to talk to you, and I want to learn, because I think for some people, the idea of having divorce without destruction just like doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. As someone who started with like a collaborative divorce and then it kind of went downhill from there, I know how destructive it can get, even when you're intentionally trying to not have it go there. So
absolutely,
really excited to learn from you on that. But I want to know, like, of all the things you could be doing as an attorney, which you won't flex on, but also as a mediator, sitting in a room with people and with families that are facing some of the toughest decisions of what their life is going to look like in the immediate and prolonged future. How did you end up deciding that that's where you wanted to put your energy and your talents?
I think my desire to be in that room is both professional and personal. Professionally, when I was in law school, I clerked for the Indiana Supreme Court, then became a staff attorney for the court, then became the executive director of one of the court's agencies. And I only say all that because that agency was the agency charged by the Supreme Court to create the training requirements for mediators. So in my role, I got to go take a boatload of mediation training and fell in love with mediation in the process. And the reason I fell in love with it was my undergraduate training was an interdisciplinary major of biology, psychology, sociology, and anthropology.
Ooh,
so basically,
you know all the stuff
people.
That makes us a bunch of weirdos, don't you?
Exactly. Okay. That was the journey. You study people, how they develop through childhood and adulthood, and how they relate to one another. And the focus of that major was taking people in a crisis and developing holistic interventions for the crisis. So if you think about the opioid crisis, we'd look at what are the biological factors of addiction, the psychological factors of addiction, the sociological factors, and how do you develop interventions that are taking into account all those different factors. And when I took mediation trainings, I saw mediation was the opportunity to do that kind of intervention for people in a legal crisis, particularly one like divorce, which isn't just legal. It affects family. It affects finances. It affects living situation. It affects community relationships. If you own a small business, it affects your business.
Everything. Nothing gets out unscathed. Yeah.
Nothing. And so I was excited to be able to try and bring that approach to families who are really struggling. And so I was pregnant with child number 4 when I stepped away from that agency and began doing mediation because I could do it around different schedules. At child number 6, I stepped away from working altogether and was home for a number of years, concentrating on mediating those pivotal questions of who gets the last cookie and who goes first on the swing.
Your mediation skills were a force of survival in your own home then. Right.
My children are my best trainers. Eventually had 8 children, loved being home with the children. But then about 10 years ago, my husband wanted a divorce. And so I was thrown from being home to having to go back to work and having to figure out how to provide for, at that point, 5 children were still home with me. And I was a single mom of 5. And
oh my gosh.
It was terrifying. And so when I walk into a mediation room, I'm bringing both that professional, we want to help you get to the places each of you needs to be, but also the personal of, I know how scary it is and how upending the process is. And I want to ease that as much as I can for people who come to us.
Well, what an incredible path. I mean, both the storied professional path that you've had and the systems you've created, and my nerdy little heart just loved all the things in the education realm and the holistic system realm that you spoke about and human behavior. And also, in addition to the professional accolades, the monumental task of raising, not just a couple of kids, but a bunch of kids and having a divorce on top of that. So I understand now, even just in that intro, the human side of the work. I could see as you were telling your story, for those of you listening right now, like the sincerity that you heard in Tess's voice was on her face as well. So I'm very happy to continue to learn from you, knowing now the frame that you have and the experience that you've been through and how that shows up, I'm sure, in every table that you're sitting across from a family on, trying to help them find a path forward.
Thank you. That's certainly the goal.
So how do you feel, like in comparison to your own story, how do you feel that most people are coming into that room with you? Is it fear? Is it anger? Is it just not knowing? What do you think kind of that first, from a human behavior standpoint, what is the first kind of safety that people are looking to you to provide?
I think what most people are feeling, and I always kind of associate fear and anger. I think people tend to be angry because deep down they're deeply afraid.
100%.
And so Hiller and I both really tried to get at what are those underlying fears, concerns, and even the desires they have come from, that's their thought out way of meeting the fear that they have. They want to be financially secure.
Yeah.
They want to make sure they can feed their children. They want to make sure they're not going to end up on the street. I remember in my own divorce, because I was not a spring chicken. I wasn't the 20-year-old just graduating from law school anymore.
Right.
And I would drive through downtown Indianapolis and see the women begging money from the street corner. I'm like, I could be like 3 weeks away from that's my next career path. Yeah. And is anybody going to allow me back into the work world? And I think particularly there are a lot of women who've been home or who have worked part-time. And so they're afraid, am I going to end up on the street?
Yeah.
Men who have worked their entire lives for their retirement plans, and now women as well, are like, I have worked so hard. Am I going to lose everything? Where are my children going to sleep? Is this parent who maybe hasn't been as involved in raising the children, are they going to even be able to get them up for school and get the homework done? And so there's just usually a lot of fear. And one of our first roles is to identify those points and then provide options. Say, here's what we can do to address those concerns. It may not be perfect, but does it assuage the fear? And I think most often that's what we see when couples are ending the process. They're saying, I thought this was going to be horrible.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a picnic, but it came out so much better than I thought it could come out. There was one particular couple, and I have their permission to use this. At the beginning, Mom arrived for the first mediation session early, and she walked in and she basically said, he is not getting a minute of parenting time. I don't care what you say. I don't care what the law says. If you try and persuade me, I'm out of here. And I was like, oh, golly gee.
Like,
how are we going to
tell you how mediation works?
Yes. So it's like, oh gosh. Okay. And so I'm talking with her, and they had a 3-year-old. She'd been at home. He had been building his business. They owned their own small business. So he hadn't been around very much. And as I talked with her, she was terrified that she was going to have to leave her baby boy, go back into the work world, wouldn't know how to do that. Dad wasn't going to have any clue on how to take care of him. And so as we had the conversations and as we unfolded the financial plan, and we're big believers, concrete information really assuages the fear.
No speculation. Get into the numbers and talk specifics for your situation.
Exactly. The numbers define the options and define what's possible. So as we worked through the numbers, and I will give kudos all day long to this dad, he understood her deepest desire was to stay home until little Guy went to kindergarten.
Yeah.
And he agreed to live in his father's basement and give her, I want to say it was like 80% of his income until little Guy went to kindergarten. She had to be getting ready to go back to work during that couple of years, but he was willing to do that. And once he made that move, her fears were assuaged. She was much more willing to talk to him. They ended up equally sharing parenting.
Really? From not a single minute to equal parenting time.
To equal parenting. And once we got to the signing of the agreement in the last session, we had read through it. I needed to make some changes. So they were just coming back individually to sign. She got there first. She came into the office, signed the agreement, went out the back door. He came down the stairs about the time she went out the back door. And he's like, "Where is wife? Where is wife?" And I said, "Oh, she just went out." So I just kind of looked out the window to make sure everything was okay. And they were laughing. He was telling a story about their little boy who had just spent the night with him. He kissed her on the cheek, walked back into the office, signed the agreement, went out the front door. And I had said to them, I'm not sure the judge will accept this agreement because judge is going to be concerned. Dad's going to kick, grandpa's going to kick dad out.
Right. Or it's too one-sided or too far away from the standard.
Exactly. And dad's going to have to ask for a change. And judge is going to say, you're not meeting the standard for a change. Or judge is going to say, I knew this wouldn't work. Yes, you're going to have to change it. And then wife's going to have depended on this. But they said, submit it. I submitted it. The judge accepted it. Dad lived up to it. They had a phenomenal co-parenting relationship as their little boy grew up. And it was because we were able to meet the highest priorities of both people in some pretty creative ways.
What an amazing story. Like there's so many things I'm thinking, even just relating to my own experience. My daughter was 3 when we separated, and we've been through all sorts of parenting time and agreements and have been co-parenting. She's turning 19 soon. So we've been in it for the long haul. But I loved the story because the quote, fear makes more decisions than data ever could.
Yes.
And I think in that case, to be able to shepherd a couple at their highest point of fear and their highest point of uncertainty and assumption and emotion, really, all the way through to getting a point where keep the most important thing.
Absolutely.
Right? The experience of their son. And be able to, because I'm sure if you would have asked her at the beginning, would he ever consider right, living in his dad's basement and supporting 80%, she would have been like, fly a kite. There's not a way. And he probably would have been like, absolutely not. So I think a credit to the value and potential of mediation and what you're able to do with your skill and experience is kind of create that impossible outcome. Like your outcome could be better than you might even be able to imagine.
Exactly.
And I think that that's so encouraging for anybody listening right now who's in that divorce curious space. And because all you can see when you haven't taken action is the worst case scenario, I think.
Absolutely.
And that becomes your boogeyman, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the monster under your bed. That's the thing that keeps you stuck or unhappy or assuming the worst. So to be able to know that A, mediation is a process that's available to you if you choose to have it, and B, that it can have outcomes far superior than maybe what you even think it could is really, to me, that's new and very encouraging information.
Well, I think a lot of the time people will ask us, what is the most common cause of divorce? And I will say, there's a whole variety of reasons you can give, but the most common cause of divorce is the trust has been broken.
Yeah.
In one way or another. Maybe it was an affair. Maybe it was embezzling funds, some big, huge thing. Or maybe it was just day after day after day, words and actions didn't match. The dry cleaning wasn't picked up.
Right.
The milk wasn't
not doing
received.
what you said you were going to do.
Not coming through for the other person, not having their back, not being their safe space. That just got chipped away by little patterns, behaviors over time. Regardless how it happened, when the trust is broken and people feel like they can't get it back, that's when they decide to divorce. And so a part of our process is not necessarily saying, we want you to trust this other person. It's, we want you to trust the process.
Yes.
That this process can help get at your desires, your priorities, meet your concerns. And through the process for both of you, and if you have children, most importantly for the children, because that's what people still have in common. That's what they still care about.
Right.
So that's their common ground.
Yeah. And you actually specialize, right, in a process for families with children.
Yes. I will have to say in law, we can't say specialty unless you've taken a certain exam.
Got it. Okay.
But yes, we do
you commonly help
we
families.
Do. We do.
Okay. That have children in the process.
Yes. It's called child inclusive mediation. And I will quickly say that doesn't mean children are sitting in the mediation session.
Thank you for clarifying.
Important clarification. But it is, we team with this phenomenal woman, Marley Emmenheiser. She has a social work background focused on child development. She's worked with children of divorce in a whole variety of ways. And she teams with us. She's also a trained family mediator. So she understands the children's experience in divorce, and she understands what we have to do in mediation, that framework. And she will first meet with parents to find out what is each parent's highest priority, concern, desire around developing this co-parenting relationship, or at least this, we're parenting from two different homes.
Yes.
And so sometimes it's I'm really concerned about other parent because of their alcohol use.
There's a big long list of things.
There's a big long list. You know, their inability to understand daughter's anorexia.
Who else is around your child and someone else's
exactly.
home? What routine they're on, what they're eating for dinner. Oh my God, the list is long.
All of it. So she gleans that from each parent. But the magic sauce is she sits with the kids and she asks them, what are your hopes? What are your desires? What are your fears? What are your concerns? The two questions she will never ask are, what do you want the parenting plan to be? Who do you want to live with?
Yep.
That's for the parents to decide.
Right.
But she will glean from them, what are they worried about? Or what do they want not to have happen? So if someone says, I really don't want to go stay with parent A, she will follow up. What is your concern about that? Well, they always have the television on and they never have food in the fridge. So then she can go back to parent A and say, I know you really want to have this relationship with your children. You really want to have this kind of parenting time. Here are the reasons children are a little reluctant. What can I do to help you be ready to be the best parent you can be as you're rebuilding your relationship with these children?
Yeah, I think that's so important because I think for so many people that find, I know when I was in just the divorce curious space, when I was trying to figure out what, the guilt or the concern, well, the guilt and the concern, honestly, of what am I now making my child endure, or what is this decision for me? Mm-hmm. How is this going to impact my child, right? Or what risk might I be introducing her to that if I'm not in the house with her all the time, right? Like you just have that, just thinking of the child experience or the experience of the children alone, I think is probably what is holding a lot of people that are in that divorce curious space stuck.
It is. And what Marley then does with that information is, like I say, she can come back to the parents individually. She'll do it jointly if there aren't any major concerns. She will do it individually and beautifully. She can bring the toughest information to a person in the most affirming, we can figure this out way. And we've had some really difficult situations.
I would have to think some parents are super resistant to that. For a number of reasons, but probably fear, again, driving that. How do you guys manage through that? What if a parent is like, no, I don't want my child in that process, or I don't?
Well, it's optional.
Yeah.
And they can choose it. We, again, try and find out what are your concerns about that. Most often it's, well, we've already got them in therapy, so they don't need something else. And this isn't therapy. What we're doing is we're saying, Marley then brings all that information back. So when we're mediating the parenting plan, there is the voice of the child that's part of the conversation.
Yeah.
And the children feel heard. Divorce stops being something that happens to the child and starts being something they're a part of. And that reduces the trauma of divorce for children. So that's the big message for parents. We also know that children, especially really well-loved children, understand how hard divorce is for parents. And so a lot of the time their coping mechanism is, I'm just not going to ask any questions. I'm not going to bring up any concerns because I don't want to make it harder.
Yeah.
Marley
takes so much of that responsibility on their shoulders.
They do. We just offer to parents, Marley can be that safe space. She will never think she's the expert on your children. You are. But maybe she's that space where children can ask the questions they've been holding back, or they can express the concerns they've been holding back. And then we can bring them into the process. So if parents are saying something like, we want 50-50 parenting, let's do week on, week off. And one child is like, I can't go a week without seeing a parent.
Yeah.
We can say, okay, if you need to stay with week on, week off for work or whatever, how do we have some, when you're not the on parent, how do we build in
Give you some presence there
for you to be there? Or if it's, let's do the 2-2-3 and the children are like, I can't carry my cello that many times a week. It's okay.
My daughter is always like, I have to pack one more bag.
Bingo. So we bring those perspectives in, and most parents really want this because most parents are holding back from divorce because they're afraid it's going to destroy their children.
Yeah.
So in our vein of, let's do divorce without destruction. How do we save your family? How do we bring in everybody's perspective so everybody has the best shot at being part of this redefined healthy family?
Well, and I think that's such an important thing to even bring awareness around, that that's an option. Because I'll tell you, like when we were kind of in that, do we get divorced, do we stay together phase, we had gone to a counselor at one point, and she said the thing that all parents considering divorce hate to hear is like, oh, well, are you sure you're okay? Or, oh, so you're telling me you're okay only having your kid half the time?
Oh, gosh.
Right. And it's like, stab me in the heart.
What a wonderful
like,
lead.
Of course, no, neither of us are okay with that. And there was no conversation around the process that you just described, or the opportunity to have flexibility and to have collaboration around that, right? Because it was just posed as like, well, this is your punishment for getting divorced, is you lose half your time with your child. And I think, again, I'm a fairly educated person. I have access to a lot of people with a lot of experience, and I just believe that was my only option, right? And that again got me stuck for another year on the fence because I just, that guilt alone was, I just never felt like I had a good decision to make. So I appreciate that you just so beautifully articulated that there are options and there are ways to bring the children into the conversation and really honor their feelings and what's best for them, and to collaborate on that. And that there's a process for doing that. And it is something that then translates into being withheld through the courts. Can you talk a little bit about kind of how mediation, like what that looks like, or is it the power that has to kind of ultimately drive the solution and what things look like going forward?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand your question.
Yeah, I think some people think like, oh, well, mediation it doesn't count, or it's not final, or it's still like it could be overruled, or like it's not going to be listened to in court.
It's still very much a legal process. We have to tick all the legal boxes. We create, once people have made their decisions, we always say we help define the issues for people, educate them on all the issues they need to address, because people are usually very aware of some, not at all aware of others. So we make sure they understand everything they need to address, options they have for addressing those issues, both the options under the statutes and guidelines, but outside those as well. And we talk about the pros and cons of the options. Here's what this option playing out looks like. Here's what's beneficial about it. Here's what's not so good about it. And then we guide the spouses through making decisions together about what combination of options will work best for their family. They decide when they're seeing their children. They decide what happens with their money. They decide how to make the transitions. And then we put all those decisions in what's called a settlement agreement. We file that settlement agreement with the court. It's enforceable by the court, but the couple never has to go to court. Everything's done in the privacy of our office.
It's just so important. I'm so glad that you're on the show and you're sharing this information, because I think back, it was a long time ago, but it doesn't always feel like it was a long time ago.
Yeah, right? It hurts.
It really is. And it's one of those things where it's like, now I'm kind of kicking myself. It's like, had I known about options like mediation and that it could be more child focused and the child could participate more, either initially or throughout the process, I think it would have saved a lot of the guilt that I think myself and like so many people that go through the divorce process really feel.
Well, and to that guilt, even when they don't have children, for couples who have just made a commitment to be with each other forever, and now it's not working, they feel that guilt. And so we want to save couples who don't have children, but they don't want to be enemies.
Yeah.
Or maybe they have a business together. They still want to be able to run that business together. Or they have groups of friends that they share. They don't want to lose half their friends because they lost their spouse. We want to be able to preserve as many of those points of contact that people want to preserve. And so to your point about the guilt, we want to help whoever comes in the office walk away feeling like there has been healing and there's been good closure.
Yeah.
And maybe they aren't bosom buddies. Maybe they're walking out and they never intend to speak to each other again, but at least they were able to be their best person in the process.
Yeah. I love that. It's such a different perspective, I think, than what people assume or what people have, seen modeled for them either through people they know or kind of more broadly in the culture. But to be encouraged that there's actually a possibility to have divorce without destruction.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be such a novel idea, but I'm going to tell you, like, it really kind of was to me. And I love being more educated on this process. I know the audience listening that's divorce curious is going to have just a whole nother outlook and an avenue to get curious about and to discover and to do some research on, to find mediators like yourself and your team. And where can people find more information about you, Tess, if they want to connect?
Well, they can come to our website, which is resolutionmediation.com.
Fantastic. Any last words of advice? Any sage wisdom for somebody who's maybe sitting there, not sure what the next best step is for them as they look at this path?
Well, I think especially for couples who do have children and they're saying, I don't know if we should go down this divorce path and what will it do to them? What will it do to our family? A question to ask yourself is, do you want your children to have the marriage you have? Children tend to become what they live. Even worse, they tend to become the worst of what they live because they figure out anybody can be kind or considerate when things are going well. If people aren't being kind or considerate when things are going badly, children tend to underestimate the value of kindness or of compassion. They say, you've got to be angry and you've got to be demanding and you've got to be all the things that are happening. Or even marriage is a place where people are just very distant and cold and polite to each other. If you don't want that for your children, then you really have a choice. You've either got to change your marriage or you've got to find a way of redefining the family and each person creating the individual homes where the culture is what they want their children to become.
That's wisdom, Tess. I can't do anything except restate that question, right? Do you want your children to have the type of marriage that you have? I think that's a challenge for any of us listening right now, anyone in the divorce curious headspace of, what do I do next and what's the best way to do it? I think guiding with that question of, is this a marriage you would want your children to be part of, will help bring a lot of clarity. And now knowing about services like Tess and mediation and the way that family can be considered and factored into that is hopefully going to fill in a couple of data points on what might be the next best step for you. So with that, divorce curious friends, I'm going to just ask you to like, share, comment on questions you have on this episode. I'm sure I could probably get Tess to come back for a part 2 if I ask her really nice, because I know my brain's on fire. But share this with somebody else that might be in that space of how and what next for me. And until next time, divorce curious friends, be good to each other.